Daniel had always been curious about the stars. Ever since he was a child, he dreamed of walking on worlds no human had ever touched. So, when his travels finally took him to the bustling trade hub of Zirath, a distant alien city filled with colors, sounds, and scents beyond imagination, he felt like he had stepped into a dream. The streets were alive with merchants calling out their wares, ships landing and taking off in the distance, and creatures of all shapes and sizes weaving. Through the crowd, Daniel walked among them with wide eyes, amazed at how life thrived here in such harmony, despite the differences in appearance and culture. But as he strolled deeper into the marketplace, he began to notice something that unsettled him. Not everyone in the crowd moved freely. A few figures stood out, marked by a strange metallic band around their necks. The collars were dark silver engraved with glowing symbols and seemed to hum with a faint energy. The wearers kept their heads lowered, moving quietly behind those who commanded them. To Daniel, it looked wrong, like something from a darker time in human history. His heart tightened as he saw the way they were ignored, as though they were invisible. Among them, one figure caught his attention more than any other. She was slender, with pale violet skin that seemed to shimmer faintly under the sunlight, and long dark hair that fell gracefully down her back. Her eyes, when she dared to lift them, held a quiet strength, but also a sadness so deep it felt like it weighed on her entire being. The collar around her neck looked heavier than the others, the symbols etched on it more complex. People passed her by as if she was nothing but a shadow, yet Daniel couldn't look away. Something about her presence drew him in. As he watched, a merchant barked at her harshly, snapping his fingers to make her carry a heavy load. She obeyed silently, her steps slow and strained. The crowd barely noticed, but Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. He had always believed in fairness, in treating every life with dignity, and what he saw now stirred something deep in him. He didn't know her, didn't know this culture, and yet, in that moment, he felt an urge to step forward. He approached quietly, unsure of what to say. She didn't meet his eyes, instead keeping her gaze fixed on the ground, as though afraid of being noticed. The closer Daniel got, the more he could see how the collar dug into her skin. It wasn't just metal, it seemed alive, its faint hum vibrating in the air. His chest tightened at the thought of anyone being forced to wear such a thing. "You all right?" he asked gently, his voice low enough not to draw too much attention. For the first time, she looked up at him directly. Her eyes were a shade of silver gray, luminous and filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She didn't speak, only studied his face as though trying to understand why he had even asked. No one else in the crowd seemed to care, so why did this human? Before Daniel could say more, the merchant barked again, annoyed that she had paused. She flinched and quickly tried to move, but the collar sparked faintly, making her stumble. Daniel's concern grew. He stepped closer, ignoring the merchant's glare. His instinct screamed at him that something had to be done. "What is this thing?" Daniel muttered, reaching toward the collar. The woman's eyes widened in alarm, and she shook her head faintly, as if to warn him. But Daniel's focus was fixed on the cruel band of metal. He had worked with tools, locks, and machines before in his travels. This collar looked like it had a seam, a weak point. Driven by compassion rather than caution, he placed his fingers at the joint. The collar vibrated, resisting his touch, but he pressed firmly. The alien symbols flickered. Somewhere in the crowd, someone gasped softly. Daniel barely noticed. He felt the mechanism shift under his grip. With one determined twist, there was a faint click, and then the collar snapped open. The metal band slid from her neck and fell to the ground with a dull clang. The air seemed to hold its breath. The woman staggered back, her hands flying to her throat in disbelief. For the first time in who knows how long, her neck was free. Her eyes widened, shimmering with tears that didn't fall, and she stared at Daniel as though he had just performed the impossible. The marketplace erupted. Voices rose in shock, some whispering urgently, others crying out in disbelief. "The collar has been broken," someone shouted. "He touched it with his bare hands." Daniel turned, confused. To him, It had been nothing more than a lock. Difficult, but not impossible. Yet the way the crowd reacted made it seem as if he had just overturned a law of nature. The merchant's face drained of color, and he backed away, muttering about curses and old laws. Daniel stood frozen, still trying to understand why everyone looked at him as though he had committed either a great crime or a great miracle. The woman, still trembling, took a hesitant step closer. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, in a voice soft but filled with awe, she whispered words Daniel couldn't understand. The alien tongue was unfamiliar, but the emotion in it was clear. Gratitude, disbelief, and something heavier, something binding. Daniel blinked at her, trying to find words. "You're free now," he said softly, hoping she would understand at least his tone if not his language. No one should have to wear something like that. She stared at him, her expression torn between relief and fear. Her hands pressed over her chest as though holding back a storm of emotions. The collar lay on the ground between them, its once bright symbols now dark and lifeless. Around them, the crowd began to whisper louder, their voices carrying a single phrase over and over, a title Daniel could not yet grasp: the Chosen Keeper. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, in freeing her from the collar, he had bound her life to his forever. The marketplace was no longer a place of trade and noise. It had turned into a circle of whispers, stares, and fear. Daniel stood at the center, confused and uneasy, while the violet-skinned woman clutched her freed neck, her eyes never leaving his face. Around them, the murmurs grew louder, blending into a strange rhythm, as though the entire city had witnessed something sacred. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He had only wanted to help, to relieve her of the cruel collar, yet the way the people reacted made it clear that this was far more serious than he imagined. The merchant who had barked orders at her moments ago was gone, disappearing into the crowd as if terrified to remain near. Others backed away as well, creating space, yet none dared turn their eyes away. The woman lowered herself suddenly to her knees before Daniel. He startled, reaching to lift her back up, but she pressed her forehead close to the ground in front of him. Her voice trembled as she spoke words in her language, but though Daniel could not understand them, he felt the weight in her tone. The sound was like a vow, a promise etched in something deeper than speech. "Hey, don't do that," Daniel said quickly, crouching to meet her eyes. He motioned for her to rise, but she hesitated, as though his gesture went against everything she had been taught. Finally, she lifted her face. Her silver-gray eyes filled with tears she tried to hold back. An elderly alien, taller than Daniel and covered in flowing dark robes, stepped forward from the crowd. His presence seemed to silence the others. He looked at Daniel with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Human," the elder spoke in broken but understandable words. "Do you know what you have done?" Daniel blinked. "I freed her, that's all." The collar looked cruel, so I opened it. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The elder shook his head slowly, his expression solemn. "Not just free. No one can open the bond collar by will. It is bound by law, by spirit, by blood of her people. Only the one chosen may break it, and you—" His eyes narrowed as if searching Daniel's soul. "You are now her keeper." Daniel felt his stomach twist. "Keeper? No, no. I don't want to keep anyone, that's not who I am." The woman touched his arm gently, her fingers light, hesitant. When Daniel looked at her, he saw not fear, but something else. It was as though a heavy burden had lifted from her shoulders, yet replaced by another bond, one she seemed unable to escape. The elder spoke again. "She is Arinya, last daughter of her line, taken as servant, bound by collar. Now, you removed. That act ties her to you. Until death, her life is yours and yours is hers." Daniel shook his head firmly. "That's not right, I don't own her. I only wanted to help." But the crowd did not see it that way. To them, he had performed something impossible, something sacred. Many bowed their heads, some in respect, others in fear. The phrase spread again among them, the chosen keeper. Daniel could hear it whispered over and over as if it were now his name. Arinya, still kneeling, spoke softly in her tongue, then tried again in broken words of trade language. You freed me. I belong to you. Her voice wavered, but her eyes never left his. Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't want her to belong to him. He wanted her to belong to herself, to be free in the truest sense. No, he said gently. You don't belong to me. You're free to go. You can live your life however you want. But at his words, she shook her head quickly, panic flashing across her face. No, I cannot leave. Bond is made. You broke. Collar. I am bound if I go far. I die. The crowd murmured louder at her words, confirming the truth of it. Daniel's heart sank. In trying to free her, he had tied her life to his own. She wasn't exaggerating. This was no ordinary chain of metal. It was part of an ancient system, one that reached deeper than flesh. The elder nodded gravely. The bond is eternal. Keeper and bound share fate. If he falls, she falls. If she is harmed, he feels. Such is the law written in ages. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration mixing with guilt. He had meant to do good, but now he had altered not only her life but his own. Still, when he looked back at Arinya, he saw no hatred in her gaze. Instead, there was a strange mixture of relief and acceptance. She was no longer chained to cruel hands. For the first time, the one holding the bond had acted out of kindness. I don't know how to handle this, Daniel admitted quietly, almost to himself. Arinya leaned closer, her voice soft but steady. I will have to follow you, serve you, protect you. That is law. Daniel shook his head. No, I don't want a servant. I want you to be free. She tilted her head, confusion clear in her expression. The word free seemed foreign to her, like a concept she could not grasp fully. Her people had lived under these laws for generations, and to her, servitude was not just a condition, it was identity, survival. To be without it was unthinkable. The elder placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You may not want this, human, but destiny has chosen. You are keeper now. Learn the bond or suffer from it. The crowd began to disperse slowly, though many still looked back with lingering awe. Some bowed to Daniel and Arinya as they left, while others whispered darkly, suspicion in their eyes. Not all would welcome such a break in tradition. As the marketplace quieted, Daniel found himself standing alone with Arinya. She still stood close, watching him with cautious loyalty. The collar lay broken on the ground, yet its shadow still lingered between them. He sighed deeply. All right, he said at last, his voice low but steady. If this bond can't be undone, then I'll make sure it's not a chain. You're safe with me, Arinya. I promise you that. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. It was small, fragile, but real. And though Daniel still struggled to understand the weight of what had happened, he knew one thing for certain. Her fate was now tied to his, and he could not walk away from that responsibility. The path ahead would not be simple, but in that moment, as she walked beside him with hesitant steps, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he could turn this bond into something far greater than chains. The streets of Zerath were quieter as Daniel and Arinya left the crowded marketplace behind. The sun was dipping low, throwing long shadows across the stone roads, but Daniel's mind was far from calm. His thoughts kept circling back to the words of the elder and the whispers of the crowd. Keeper. Bound. Forever. He hadn't asked for any of this, yet it seemed he had stepped into a responsibility that could not be undone. Beside him, Arinya walked with careful steps, keeping a half pace behind him as though afraid to overstep. Her silver-gray eyes followed his movements constantly, alert and steady, as if guarding him from dangers unseen. Daniel noticed this and frowned. He slowed his pace so she would walk at his side, but she quickly adjusted, once again moving slightly. "Behind. You don't have to do that," Daniel said, glancing at her. "You're not my servant. You don't need to trail behind me." She looked puzzled at his words. "I must follow. Keeper goes first. Bound walks after. It is law." Daniel sighed. Every time she spoke of law, his chest tightened. To her, this wasn't just habit, it was survival. He wanted to argue, to explain that he didn't want her obedience, but he saw the fear flicker in her eyes when she thought she might displease him. It broke his heart. They stopped at a small rest house for travelers, a place with warm lights glowing through its windows. Daniel rented a modest room, but when they entered, Arinya immediately stood by the door, silent, waiting. "You can sit," Daniel said, motioning to the small bench by the wall, but she shook her head. "Bound stands. Keeper rests." Daniel ran a hand across his forehead, trying not to let frustration take over. "Listen, Arinya, I don't know how things work here, but where I come from, people sit together, eat together, walk together. Equal. Do you understand? Equal." She tilted, her head repeating the word slowly as though it was unfamiliar. "Equal," her voice carried uncertainty, as if the concept was something she had never lived. Daniel sat on the bench, then patted the space beside him. After a long moment of hesitation, she obeyed and sat, though her posture was stiff, as if she expected punishment. Daniel softened his tone. "See? Nothing bad happened. You're allowed to sit." Her gaze lowered, and for the first time since he freed her, she looked unsure of how to behave. She had been bound for so long that freedom felt like something dangerous. After a while, food was brought to them, simple bread and a warm stew. Daniel began to eat, but Arinya pushed her bowl aside. "Bound does not eat before keeper." Daniel pushed his bowl toward her. "Then I won't eat unless you eat too. How about that?" Her silver eyes widened, startled. She studied him for a long moment, then slowly, hesitantly, lifted her spoon. Her hands trembled at first, but once she tasted the food, something softened in her expression. Daniel smiled faintly, relief filling him. As they ate together, he tried to ask her more about the collar, about what it meant. Her words were broken in his language, but the meaning was clear enough. The collar wasn't just a chain. It was an ancient creation, meant to control the will of her people. Only someone chosen by fate, or by forces beyond understanding, could break it. And whoever did so was tied to the freed one for life. Arinya explained that the bond was not simply tradition, it was real, etched into her very being. She could not stray far from him, or her body would weaken. If harm came to her, he would feel the pain, and if death claimed either of them, the bond would drag the other into the same fate. Daniel listened carefully, a heavy weight settling over him. He had thought he had saved her, but in truth he had locked both of them into something neither could escape. "So no matter what, we're tied together," he murmured, half to himself. Arinya's gaze was steady as she answered, "Yes. Keeper and bound are one." Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. "This is a lot." But when he looked at her again, he saw a quiet strength in her eyes. Though she spoke of being bound, there was no bitterness there. Instead, there was something like trust beginning to form. She was no longer chained to cruelty. For the first time, her keeper was someone who had shown her kindness. That night, when they rested, Arinya insisted on staying near the door, keeping watch. Daniel tried to convince her to rest properly, but she only shook her head. Keeper sleeps. Bound guards. Exhausted, Daniel finally lay down, though he couldn't fall asleep right away. He listened to the quiet sounds of the city outside, the faint rustle of Arinya's movements as she remained alert. His mind spun with questions. Could he ever undo this bond? Could he help her live freely without the shadow of servitude? Or was he destined to carry this role forever? Despite his doubts, he knew one thing: he could not abandon her. She had spent too long suffering under others. If she was bound to him, then he would make sure she was treated with dignity, not as a servant, but as someone worthy of respect. When morning came, Daniel woke to find Arinya still sitting upright, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but her posture unbroken. He sat up quickly. "You didn't sleep at all, did you?" She lowered her gaze. "Bound cannot sleep if keeper rests. Must guard." Daniel shook his head, his voice firm but kind. "Not anymore. From now on, you rest when I rest. That's not a request. It's me making sure you're healthy." For the first time, her lips curved into the faintest smile. It was fragile, hesitant, but it carried warmth. Daniel realized that slowly, bit by bit, he was breaking the walls that years of servitude had built around her, as they prepared to leave the rest house. Arinya followed at his side again, but this time she didn't fall as far behind. It was a small change, but Daniel noticed it. Progress was slow, but it was there. The world outside was filled with challenges he could not yet imagine. Others would not accept what had happened so easily. Some might envy, some might fear, and some might even hate the bond they now shared. But as they stepped back into the sunlit streets together, Daniel knew one thing clearly: their journey had only just begun. And though the bond was born from chains, he was determined to turn it into something far stronger, something built not on control, but on trust. The city of Zirath did not forget what had happened in the marketplace. Even as Daniel and Arinya walked the streets together in the days that followed, people turned to watch them. Some bowed their heads in respect, whispering about the chosen keeper, while others looked on with suspicion or even envy. Daniel could feel the weight of those stares pressing on him wherever he went. Arinya stayed close, her presence quiet but steady. She no longer walked so far behind, but Daniel could tell that every step she took beside him was a battle with her own instincts. The bond between them was real. He could sense her emotions at times, faint like distant echoes. When she felt uneasy, his chest tightened. When she felt calm, a strange peace washed over him too. One afternoon, as they rested in a small garden filled with alien flowers that glowed softly under the sunlight, Daniel tried again to explain what he wanted for her. "You don't have to serve me, Arinya. I know your people's laws say otherwise, but I don't accept that. I want you to live as yourself, not as someone's property." Arinya's silver-gray eyes studied him carefully. "You speak strange words. Yourself. I do not know what it means." Daniel's heart ached at that. She had lived her whole life bound by rules and collars. The idea of living for her own choices was something she could not even define. He leaned forward, speaking softly. "It means you can decide who you are, not because of law, not because of chains, because you choose." She lowered her gaze, her fingers brushing the grass beneath her. "If I choose to stay." Daniel exhaled, torn between relief and sadness. She wasn't ready yet to step away from the bond, but he could see she was slowly beginning to trust that his intentions were different from the masters she had known before. Their peace didn't last long. That evening, as they made their way back toward the rest house, a group of armored figures blocked their path. Their leader, tall and broad with a hardened face, pointed at Daniel. "You are the human who broke the collar," he said with scorn. "You walk with what was not yours to take." Daniel stepped forward, keeping his tone calm. "I didn't take her. I freed her." The man's eyes narrowed. "There is no freedom for her kind. You mock our traditions. Return the girl, or face the judgment of the council." Arinya stiffened beside Daniel, her hand twitching as if to reach for a weapon she did not carry. Her fear rippled through the bond, and Daniel felt it in his chest like a tightening rope. He placed himself in front of her, standing firm. "I won't hand her over. She's not property, not anymore. The soldiers muttered angrily, but before the situation could spiral, the elder from the marketplace appeared. His robed figure seemed to command silence. "Enough," he said. "The bond is made. It cannot be broken by force. To harm the keeper is to harm the bound, and to harm the bound is to defy the law itself. Leave them." The soldiers hesitated, then withdrew reluctantly, throwing dark looks at Daniel as they disappeared into the crowd. Daniel let out a slow breath, tension leaving his body. Arinya touched his arm gently, her eyes wide with gratitude. Through the bond, he could feel her relief and something deeper, something like admiration. That night, as they sat together in the quiet of their small room, Arinya spoke in a low voice. "Many will hate you now, for breaking collar, for keeping me. They will not stop." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "Let them hate me then. I'd rather carry that than let you go back to chains." Her eyes shimmered, and for the first time, she reached out without hesitation, her hand resting over his. The bond pulsed faintly, warm and steady. Daniel realized that trust was beginning to grow, slowly but surely between them. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel and Arinya's lives began to settle into a rhythm. They traveled together across the city and beyond, seeking answers about the bond they now shared. At first, Daniel's only goal had been to find a way to undo it, to give Arinya complete freedom. But the more time he spent with her, the more he saw that their connection was no longer a chain. It was becoming something else, something neither of them could deny. Arinya began to change, little by little. She no longer waited for Daniel to command her every action. When they stopped to eat, she sat beside him without hesitation. When they walked, she kept pace at his side rather than trailing behind. Sometimes she even smiled, soft and fleeting, but real. Daniel noticed that her laughter, though rare, was like sunlight breaking through clouds. One evening, as they camped under the open sky outside the city, Daniel stared at the stars while Arinya sat quietly nearby. "Do you ever wonder what you would do," he asked gently, "if the bond could be broken? If you were truly free?" Arinya thought for a long time, her gaze on the flickering firelight. At last she answered, "Once I dreamed of freedom, but freedom was far, like stars I could not touch. Now, I do not dream the same. Even if bond breaks, I would choose to stay." Her words struck Daniel deeply. She wasn't speaking from fear or duty, she was speaking from choice. The very thing he had hoped for was happening. She was no longer bound because of law alone. She was bound because she wanted to be. In time, the whispers in Zyrath began to change. At first, people had seen Daniel as a thief of tradition, an outsider who disrupted sacred laws. But as stories spread of his kindness, of how he treated Arinya not as a servant but as an equal, some began to see him differently. Others, of course, remained hostile, clinging to old ways. But it no longer mattered as much. One morning, the elder met them again. His expression was thoughtful as he studied the pair. "You have done what no keeper before you has done," he said. "You treat her not as bound, but as partner. Perhaps the law itself will change because of you." Daniel glanced at Arinya, who stood tall at his side, her eyes bright with quiet strength. "She doesn't belong to me," he said, softly. "She belongs to herself, and if she chooses to stay, then I'm grateful for it." Arinya's lips curved into a gentle smile. She looked at Daniel with a gaze filled not with fear or obligation, but with trust, and something even deeper, though she didn't name it. Together, they turned their backs on the city's noise and set off into the wider world. Their bond was still there, etched into their lives, but it no longer felt like chains. It felt like a bridge, a connection that neither law nor tradition could define. The collar that once marked her slavery lay forgotten in Daniel's pack, a relic of the past. To Arinya, it was no longer a symbol of pain, but of the day her life had truly begun. And as they walked side by side into the unknown, both knew that though fate had bound them by accident, their choice to remain together was what truly mattered.